Hey y'all, and welcome back to another Photoshop tutorial where we learn some tips and tricks to improve your Photoshop workflow and techniques, and we learn some pretty cool tricks to use in Adobe Photoshop to step up your workflow or just streamline your workflow. So tune in every Monday when we cover our Photoshop tutorials on my Pic Visions channel, Pic Visions LLC, Media Arts and Photography. I am Jane Corley with Pic Visions. And please make sure to like this video if you learned something new, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you can be notified every time a new video is uploaded every week. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about blending options. They are not the same as blending modes, blending options. There are three ways to get your blending options menu. Either you can double click on the layer, not on the text, on the layer portion, and your layer style window will pop up. You can also come up to layer and go to layer style blending options, and you have all of your individual blending options down here. If you'd like to select them individually, it'll take you directly to that panel. Or, as I like to do it, you can come to background copy or whatever layer you're wishing to manipulate with your blending options and just go up to blending options. Now with blending options, it's not the same as blending mode, as I said. What I have done here to prepare for this lesson, I have a text layer that we're going to manipulate with blending options, and then I also have a copy layer of just this freaky chick right here doing her zombie thing. It is a whole separate layer. As you see, I've just copied it, made a selection, Control C and Control V to copy it onto a new layer. So let's get started on blending options. I'm going to start with little chick here, and as I said, my workflow is to right click if you have the option on a PC, and we have here all of these options. I'll give you a little quick tip just in case you are having some issues. If you are on bevel and emboss making your adjustments and you're wanting to add an outer glow, as you see the bevel and emboss window is still up, you have to click on the actual words or the tab information to get the window for manipulation. So we will start with styles. The styles, it's a layer style window with blending options available. The style window is going to add a style. It's going to add, a design. It's going to add a gradient look. It's going to add a color fill. It's going to add nothing if you choose it to add nothing. And it's just presets, style presets. I rarely use them. They're very useful if you're wanting to pair them with opacity, especially when it comes to text. But when it comes to images, placing these images with a blending option, I never use style. So let's move on to blending options, the reason why we're here. As you notice with the blending options, you have blending modes. You can go to a normal blend, or you can do a blending mode, like a lighten or even a screen or multiply, or even do an overlay. Just the same. If you have questions with blending modes, please take a look at my video from last week when we talked nothing but blending modes. You also have an opacity slider, a fill slider, and you can select your individual channels to make blending adjustments on. If you see here, you blend interior as a group, blend clipped layers, and you've got some other great options. Let's move on to bevel and emboss. Bevel and emboss has styles, techniques, depth, directions, size, and soften in the main structure menu. You have inner bevel, outer bevel, emboss, pillow emboss, and stroke emboss. Stroke emboss, that is an outline emboss. Pillow emboss it's going to give you a more lifted look. Emboss is just a normal emboss. Inner bevel is going to be inside the selection bevel, and then outer bevel is going to be outside the selection bevel. You can also create depth, more depth or less depth, depending on what you're looking for. You can change your direction up or down, and then you can also change the size of the bevel and softness of the bevel as well. The gloss contour is going to be, like I said, a lot more with the shading, so just play around with it. There's a lot of really cool effects in here that can really do some really great things. Highlight mode is going to play in screen because that's how we roll the dice when it comes to highlights, and then multiply when we go to shadows, as we learned in our blending mode. Those are the most popular. You also have opacity sliders you can manipulate if you would like. So contour is contour. Contour is going to give you direction for your contour if you would like it, and then it's going to give you a range for the contour as well based on what you would like. Then we have a texture option, and your texture is going to provide patterns within the bevel and emboss. You have a scale and a depth, and then you can always snap to origin if you're having any issues. You have plenty of patterns to choose from, and then you can always import patterns as well through this settings menu. Let's move on to stroke. Your stroke is an outline. If you've never heard of a stroke is outlining the selection. You can adjust the size of the stroke, you can adjust the opacity, the position, inside, outside, and center, and then you also can adjust the blend mode on the physical stroke. The strokes is used pretty regularly for thumbnails for YouTube, or if you're just trying to outline something like text. And you can also do a fill color with a gradient, and then through this window here you can go to your hue picker and choose what color you would like your stroke to be. Let's click off of that and move on to inner shadow. Inner shadow is an inner shadow. You can choose different blend modes to affect the inner shadow, your opacity slider, you have your angle as well. Then your distance is going to be where you see your depth, your choke as well, and then of course your size. Depending on what you're trying to get, it can usually make a pretty cool effect if it's something that you're wanting to work with based on the content of your image. Move on to inner glow. Inner glow is just like inner shadow, but it is glow mode, not shadow mode. Glow, we have screen because that's enlighten. We'll switch it to normal so we can see what we're working with. And the automatic is going to be that yellow. I tend to like to change it to white for the normal uses I have. You also have a gradient option where you can pick a gradient as your inner glow. Opacity and noise sliders, as I said, and then your elements. Your elements are going to give you options to create inner glows based on detail. And then you got your size and your choke, depending on what you're wanting to work with. Then you have quality with contour, range, and jitter if you'd like to make those adjustments as well. Satin is something I rarely use. I don't know too many post-production artists who use it for photography, illustrations and things. Satin's kind of cool, and it does have some text effects on it. But the satin I just rarely use. You do have blend mode options with those, opacity, angle. You can adjust the distance if you'd like, as well as the size and the contour, similar to other menus. Let's click off of that and go to color overlay. Color overlay is something that's really awesome for text. You have blend mode options here. You can change your hue picker and pick something based on whatever color you'd like. You can also pick it with your eyedropper and import it into the color overlay as we have in other tutorials. And similar to other windows in this blend mode and layer styles window, you have an opacity slider. Gradient overlay is exactly what you imagine it to be. It is a overlay of a gradient onto the selection you've made. Blend mode, you can adjust the gradient. Let's see here. Let's go to multiply so we can kind of see how the difference is. That kind of looks a little bit like that satin that we were just on. Let's try a screen. You see that you can come up with some really awesome effects. You also have an opacity slider and gradient selections you can make based on what you want the look to look like. Paired with a mask, these are awesome. If I wanted to change her skirt, or even just match this pocket square, or change the gradient in her face, I could pair this with a mask and have some pretty awesome success. You have style as well. You can go with a radial where it comes from the center, and reflected where it's reflected on itself, and then you have an angle option as well where you can put in your degrees if you like, or you can just mess around with it. I find that's a little bit more successful, just to mess around with it until I get exactly what I want. Then you've got your scale slider based on how intense you want the gradient, blend mode, screen, opacity, all these things combined. What scale do you want it to be reflected on the image? Similar to gradient, you also have a pattern overlay. Pattern overlay is going to do a very similar thing as the gradient. You have your blend mode options, you have your opacity options, and you have your patterns to choose from, with the option to import more patterns if you would like. You can link it with the layer as we have selected here, or not link it with the layer if you wish it to be a standalone, and then of course the scale if you'd like to zoom in or zoom out, giving it more or less information. After pattern overlay, we do have outer glow. Outer glow is something that I use pretty regularly. Outer glow is, I like to use it for my thumbnails rather than stroke because I get a little bit more dissipating off the edge, and I just think it looks a little bit better. It's a little bit more my style. So let's go through with the outer glow. I'm going to switch this to normal so we know what we're looking at. You got your opacity, same as all the other ones. You got your noise. As I said in the other one, I like to usually work with white. You have a gradient option if you want it to be a gradient outer glow. Then with spread and size, this is where the magic really happens. Your size and your spread is going to give you the reach that you want. It's going to give you that outer glow if you're wanting it to be out. If you're wanting it to be a little bit wider than the selection. If you want it to be less of a spread where it's condensed in the middle, closer to the subject matter, and then it dissipates off into the edge, whereas your size is the size of the actual glow radius around the subject. You also have quality with contour, range and jitter, and we'll move on to drop shadow. Drop shadow is real cool, y'all. Drop shadow it's used all the time in text. We'll hit on it in just a few minutes. But just like every other blending option that we've worked with, you do have blending modes that you can manipulate the blending option with. You have your opacity slider and your angle slider. Let's bump up this distance and the spread and the size so we see what we're working with. You see this black out here? If you manipulate the size and get it more condensed, it will provide this hard edge. If you manipulate the spread, it will become less condensed or more condensed. The distance is how far away from the subject matter to the edge of the shadow. As we bump it up, see now there's even space between. It's almost like she lost her shadow. But this is my favorite part. You can adjust the angle at which the shadow is coming from. So the angle, you can really change your lighting in a lot of situations with this when your information is set the way that you want it and your manipulations are made and you got it exactly the way that you want it. You also have quality and contour if you'd like to make those adjustments as well. So let's put some things together. That's kind of how it works with an image. I do use blending options for portraits. I'll use a lot of them in photo restorations when I'm trying to acquire maybe a shadow or a little bit of depth where the image has been flattened over time because of deterioration. I use blending options always when it comes to text. Always. I love texts. But before we move into our text, I do want you to notice that this is a living layer. This is not permanent. This is non-destructive. Everything can be taken off. Everything can be manipulated because it is on its own layer. If you ever want to get back to a specific adjustment, let's say I want to go back to this bevel and emboss. You notice it says Effects, Bevel and Emboss. I'm going to double click on Bevel and Emboss, and it's going to pop up the window exactly where I set it at. So if you have an inner shadow, let's put a stroke on it, color overlay, just to be messy, and hit OK. Notice that all of that information popped up here in this layers panel. So if I wanted to come in here and say, well, I don't really like that color overlay, let me come in here, click off that check. While I'm in here, I don't really like that pattern overlay. Yeah, okay, that looks good. Easy peasy, no issues. This allows you to have a live edit and then see the eyeball is off. That means that I can click on or off just in case I change my mind at any point later on down the road. Do notice that these effects also act like layers act. Pattern overlay is underneath color overlay, so if I take off the color overlay and put on the pattern overlay now shows through because the color overlay is not in the way. These layers will hide each other, but identical to the way that layers will hide each other above and below. So let's take all of these effects and we'll leave the ones on that are the least distracting. We'll just leave it like that and we'll move forward. Let's go to text. I'm going to move this text up here above so that it's on top. And let's jump into some quick blending options before we shut it down for the day. Text is awesome for blending options. I've seen a lot of YouTubers, they do a lot of blending options with text, but I wanted to show you guys that it's also used on images. So this is black. I did that on purpose so that we could see what we're working with. First and foremost, let's throw a stroke on it. Well, the stroke is black and it's not going to look like it makes any difference, but let's see what happens when I choose it to white. It now pops that information off of the screen. With a bevel and emboss, let's do an outer bevel and let's do it soft, and I'm going to put a little bit of depth in it. It is it's easy. Let's try smooth. It's easy to go too far with a bevel, so don't go too far. Let's just put it that way. Don't go too far. Be cautious, because bevel and emboss can go very quickly. It just doesn't look good. It's an easy way to create logos. A lot of people use blending options to create logos if they're not familiar with Illustrator or the pen tool yet, and it's really helpful. It's really, really helpful. But do not limit yourself to blending options if you're creating a logo. Just get more creative. We'll have a tutorial coming down the road on how to create your own logo in Photoshop. So let's continue on with blending options. I'm going to go with an inner shadow. I'm going to put everything on normal just so we're all on the same page. Do notice over here in your preview window you do have a really awesome preview available. If you don't see your preview happening over here, do make sure that your preview box is checked for a live preview. I'm going to do some pretty drastic things over here so that we got something to work with and look at. Put an outer glow on it. We'll adjust the spread so we can see it a little bit better, and we'll adjust the size so that we can see it a little bit better. There we go. And then we'll do a drop shadow. I know already I want to have it underneath. Make a manipulation to our contour just to get a little extra oomph. And outer glow, I'm also going to change that to a white and hit OK. And hit OK. Now this is really rough. This is something that you might use for things, you might not. But when it comes to the effects applied on text, your text is going to be more successful with a bevel, not an outer bevel, because it looks like a stroke combined with an outer glow. But if you do an inner bevel, your inner bevel now becomes part of the text. And for this image, it kind of looks like smoke, which is kind of what I wanted to work with. And if I add a texture element, it gives it even more of an emboss and bevel. Let's play around with this emboss. See how it has a three-dimensional sort of look to it. It's not just flat. That's what your bevel and emboss is going to do. So let's hit OK. Now I have all of this information up here it's really great. It's something that we did it on purpose. If you wanted to eliminate some of this information up here without going through your text mode, without going through your effects mode, you would have to rasterize the type if you wanted to make the adjustment outside of the blending option. So just be mindful of that when you're making your adjustments if it's something that you wanted to change. If you adjust the opacity on your opacity slider here and your fill on your fill slider here, it's going to adjust this physical layer. It's not going to adjust the blending options, so just be mindful of that. And one last tip for us before we shut her down. I'm going to shut all these off so we can see what we're working with. You can make blending options on just brush strokes if you would like as well. They act the same way as text and images. Blending options are just a way to step up a layer. Let's take a look. Right click, blending options, or remember you can go to layer, layer style, blending options. So let's do a bevel and emboss. Let's do emboss this time. And then we'll make the depth a little bit deeper, so we get a little bit more of that shadow. We'll make the size a little bit larger to give it a little bit more pop. I'm going to soften it to make it look a little bit more realistic. And I will change my angle. Make it look like it's coming from a different direction, because I have a little bit of brush stroke up top. The stroke, I don't really want to add a stroke. Let's see what a white stroke looks like. That doesn't look too bad. We'll leave it there, and I'll bump up my stroke just a little bit to separate it from the frame. See how the stroke goes on the back side of the bevel as well? It almost goes underneath the bevel. See how these react underneath? Similar to the way that they're laid out here, underneath, stacked on top of each other, and they're going to react the same way layers react when they're stacked on top of each other. So let's grab a color overlay. I know it's a little bit redundant because we used our brush tool with this brown. Say I wanted to change it to this red color. Let's make it a little bit darker. And we'll bring the opacity down just so we can see how these colors are blending together. Then lastly, we'll throw a drop shadow on it. In normal blend mode, please. I will adjust a distance slider until it starts to come out. And I will create more spread and make the size a little bit larger as well to dissipate it off so it actually physically looks like it's coming off of the paper. And as we see here, your effects panels does show up, so you have all of these manipulatable areas here that you can shut on and off if you'd like to see what it looks like with and without the effects and blending option adjustments. So I do hope that this video was helpful on how to use and manipulate blending options. Please leave it in the comments below if you have any questions or concerns or anything that I forgot in this tutorial. I would love to hear from you. Also, tell me what's your favorite blending option to use. I'd love to hear from you guys and some different ways that you guys use blending options in your post-production workflow. Until next week, I am Jane Corley with Pic Visions, Media Arts and Photography. Please make sure to like this video if you learned something new, subscribe, and ring the bell. And I can't wait to see you guys next week. Have a good one. Bye, y'all.